the secret weapon of a conqueror. History remembers the great conquerors by their armies, their strategies, and their steel. Alexander's phalanx, Roman legions, Napoleon's Grande Armée. But what if the most powerful weapon was not a sword, but his food? In the 13th century, a single man united a scattered people. His name was Genghis Khan. His army swept across continents with a speed and ferocity that seemed almost supernatural. They were a storm unleashed from the vast, empty plains of Mongolia, a force that toppled ancient dynasties. They redrew the map of the known world, from the Pacific Ocean to the heart of Europe. How did they do it? How did a nomadic people, outnumbered and seemingly isolated, build the largest contiguous land empire in human history? Scholars studied their military tactics, their horsemanship, and the discipline of their warriors. Yet a fundamental question is often overlooked. What did these soldiers eat? What fuel powered this engine of conquest? The answer is crucial, a secret carried in the saddlebags of every Mongol rider. This is not just a story about meals, it is about survival, strategy, and a deep connection to their environment. Their diet was a masterpiece of efficiency, born of harsh homeland realities. It let them travel light, move faster, and survive conditions that would break others. We will uncover the specific foods that fueled this empire. We will explore what they ate, how they prepared it, and why it gave them an edge. The source of their power begins with sustenance. It begins with the milk of their mares and the meat of their flocks. An army that truly marched on its stomach. We journey to the wind-swept plains of ancient Mongolia to discover how diet helped them conquer the world. It's quite something to consider. To understand the food that fueled the Mongol horde, you must first understand the land that forged them. Imagine a place of brutal extremes. This is the Mongolian steppe, a vast, treeless ocean of grass that stretches to the horizon under an endless sky. In summer, the sun is relentless, baking the earth until it cracks. In winter, the temperature plummets to unimaginable depths, with biting winds and deep, unyielding snow that can bury the landscape for months on end. This is a world with no cities, no permanent farms, and very few places to hide from the elements. It is a land that demands resilience. Life here was a constant cycle of movement, dictated by the changing seasons and the needs of the animals that sustained the people. The Mongols were nomads, their existence intertwined with their herds of sheep, goats, camels, horses. Their homes were not made of stone or wood, but of felt and lattice, easily disassembled and carried on the backs of their beasts. They did not plant crops in settled fields. Their fields were the endless pastures, and their harvest was the meat and milk of their livestock. This constant mobility was not a choice. It was the only way to survive in such a challenging environment. This nomadic lifestyle profoundly shaped every aspect of Mongol culture, but none more so than their food. There was no room for elaborate kitchens or delicate ingredients. Every meal had to be simple, portable, and packed with the energy needed to endure long journeys and harsh weather. Food was not merely for enjoyment, a tool for survival, a source of strength, and a strategic asset. The scarcity of resources meant that nothing could be wasted. Every part of an animal, from its meat and milk to its blood and bones, was utilized in some way, creating a diet that was incredibly efficient and perfectly adapted to their way of life. Here, the central question of our story takes shape. Can a diet, shaped by such a harsh environment, become the foundation for a military superpower? Could the simple, high-energy foods of the steppe nomads be the key to their unmatched stamina and lightning-fast campaigns? The evidence suggests that the answer is a resounding yes. The Mongol diet was not a limitation, but a liberation. It freed their armies from the slow, cumbersome supply lines that tethered traditional armies to their bases, allowing them to move with a speed and freedom that left their enemies perpetually off balance, always one step behind the thundering hooves of the horde. That mobility was everything. The Mongol world revolved around a sacred principle known as the five snouts: sheep, goats, camels, oxen, horses. Sheep and goats provided the bulk of daily sustenance: meat, milk, wool, felt for furs. Grazing herds were the walking pantry of the steppe. Oxen carried heavy loads. Camels carried heavy loads. Camels endured heat and cold. Camels crossing the Gobi Desert. Camels powered migration caravans. Life was measured by herd cycles: birthing, shearing, moving to new pastures. The Mongol diet centered on animal products. There was almost no agriculture on the steppe. Why sow seeds you'll leave in weeks? They harvested what moved with them. Their food was high in protein and fat, perfect fuel. This bred respect and hard pragmatism toward animals. Animal as companion, and as food. That mindset became a military advantage. Armies moved with herds and pack animals, an asset no settled empire could match. So yeah, that was a huge edge. While all 5 snouts were essential, one animal stood far above the rest, occupying a place at the very core of the Mongol soul: the horse. For the Mongols, the horse was more than just a mount or a beast of burden. It was a partner, a weapon, and a sacred symbol of freedom and power. Mongol children learned to ride almost as soon as they could walk, developing an unparalleled level of equestrian skill that would become their hallmark on the battlefield. A Mongol warrior was said to be more at home in the saddle than on his own 2 feet. This bond was absolute, creating a cavalry force that moved with the fluidity of a single organism, a thundering wave of man and beast. The Mongolian horse itself was a marvel of natural engineering, perfectly adapted to the harsh environment. It was relatively small, stocky, and possessed legendary stamina. It could survive on sparse grazing, digging through snow with its hooves to find frozen grass, on your steppe. Unlike the larger, more delicate war horses of European knights, the Mongol horse could endure extreme temperatures and travel immense distances without needing special fodder or care. Each warrior would typically travel with a string of 3 to 5 horses, rotating between them to keep the animals fresh. This allowed them to cover up to 100 miles in a single day, a pace that was simply unthinkable for any other army of the time. The horse's contribution to the Mongol diet was just as critical as its role in mobility and warfare. Mare's milk was a staple food, providing essential nutrients and hydration. It was consumed fresh but was more often fermented into a potent, slightly alcoholic beverage known as airag or kumis. This drink was a cornerstone of their diet, a source of vitamins and probiotics that were otherwise scarce in their meat-heavy regimen. It was a social drink, a ritual offering, and a practical source of nourishment all in one. The ability to milk their mounts on the move meant that every soldier had access to a regenerating food source, further lightening the need for cumbersome supply wagons. In times of extreme desperation, the horse could also become the final source of sustenance. A warrior, far from supplies and facing starvation, could make a small incision in the vein of one of his horses, and drink a portion of its blood, often mixed with milk. This practice, while sounding gruesome, was a life-saving measure that provided vital protein and fluids without killing the precious animal. This willingness to use their horses in every conceivable way, for transport, for battle, for milk, and even for blood, demonstrates the pragmatic and unsentimental efficiency that defined Mongol survival and, ultimately, their military supremacy. The horse was not just an animal they rode, it was the engine of their entire world. Well, I mean, it really was everything to them. When one imagines the staple food of the Mongol warrior, the first and most foundational element is mutton. Sheep were the most numerous of the 5 snouts, the cornerstone of the nomadic herd, the most accessible source of fresh meat. The daily life of a Mongol family, and by extension a Mongol army on the march, was punctuated by the consumption of mutton. A Mongol camp was rarely without the smell of boiling mutton wafting from a large iron cauldron. The preferred method of preparation was almost always boiling. This technique was born from a deep-seated pragmatism. Boiling, however, conserved everything. The meat was cooked until tender, and the resulting broth, a rich, fatty, and deeply savory liquid, was considered just as important as the meat itself. This broth, often simply called shou, was sipped to provide warmth, hydration, and a powerful dose of calories and electrolytes. The process of butchering and cooking was a ritual in itself. Nothing was wasted. After an animal was slaughtered, its meat was skillfully sectioned. The choicest parts were often reserved for elders or honored guests. The less desirable cuts, along with the organs, were also consumed, providing a wider range of vitamins and minerals. For the individual soldier, a meal of boiled mutton and broth represented more than just sustenance. It was a moment of community and normalcy amidst the chaos of a campaign. Sharing a meal from a communal pot reinforced bonds of loyalty and camaraderie. This simple, hearty meal provided the high-fat, high-protein energy required for endurance, muscle repair, and, critically, for staying warm in the frigid temperatures they often faced. Mutton was not just food, It was the bedrock of their physical and psychological resilience on the path of conquest. While mutton was the daily staple, horse meat held a special, almost ceremonial significance. The horse was the most revered animal in their culture, a symbol of status, power, and the warrior spirit. Consuming its flesh was therefore not a casual act. It was often reserved for special occasions and feasts, or as a vital source of strength during the harshest periods of the year, particularly the brutal winter. Horse meat is leaner than mutton, but was believed to impart a unique kind of strength and warmth to the body, a quality highly prized by warriors facing long, cold campaigns. The sheer practicality of consuming horse meat on a military campaign cannot be overstated. Each warrior traveled with a string of remounts. This personal herd was also a walking larder. When a horse became lame, was injured in battle, or was simply too old to continue, it could be slaughtered to feed the warrior and his comrades. This eliminated the need to transport food for the army and ensured that even a liability, an injured horse, could be transformed into a valuable resource. The fat from the horse was considered a delicacy and a concentrated source of energy. In the depths of winter, consuming this fat was essential for survival, providing the immense caloric intake needed to generate body heat in a sub-zero environment. The ability to ride their transportation one day and eat it the next gave Mongol armies a logistical flexibility that was, quite simply, unstoppable. The horse was the engine of their conquest, both as a mount and, when necessary, as a meal that fueled the rider. Of all the foods in the Mongol arsenal, none was more strategically important than borts. This air-dried meat was the solution to feeding an army on the move. The process was brilliantly simple. Long, thin strips of beef or horse meat were hung to dry in the cool, arid air of the steppe, preserving it perfectly without salt or smoke. The resulting product was as hard as wood. It was incredibly lightweight. It was almost completely non-perishable, making it the ideal ration for a fast-moving cavalry force. The genius of borts lay in its incredible density and portability. A single warrior could carry enough concentrated protein to sustain himself for weeks, if not months. This food technology severed the Mongol army's dependence on slow, cumbersome supply trains. Preparing borts for a meal was just as simple. The rock-hard strips could be gnawed on raw. The more common method was to grind or pulverize the borts into a fibrous powder. A small handful of this powder, tossed into a pot of hot water or even a cup, would rehydrate and swell, creating a rich and surprisingly flavorful meat soup. This single innovation gave Genghis Khan and his generals a staggering strategic advantage. Their armies could appear as if from nowhere. They could bypass fortified cities, strike deep into enemy territory, cut off their opponent's supply lines, while having none of their own to protect. Borts was more than preserved food. It was a weapon of war. Alongside the red foods of meat and blood, the Mongol diet was equally reliant on white foods. Dairy was not a luxury, but a fundamental pillar. The most famous product is arag, also called kumiz, fermented mare's milk, Mongolia's national drink. New milk added to the old, churned regularly. The beverage became effervescent, sour, slightly alcoholic. When milk was too plentiful, it was turned into yogurt or cheese, curds eaten fresh like cottage cheese, or pressed and dried into arul. Arul, hard sour cakes, concentrated calcium and protein, stored indefinitely, the perfect travel snack. A warrior could carry a few pieces of arul in his pocket, gnawing on one for hours to stave off hunger on a long patrol. Another white food, milk tea, sute tsai, made by boiling brick tea, then adding milk, then adding salt. Often a knob of butter or mutton fat melted into tea for energy. For the Mongol soldier, white foods were a constant and portable source of diverse nutrition, physical sustenance, and psychological comfort on the long road to empire. The Mongol diet was more than just a collection of meals. It was a high-performance fuel system, perfectly engineered by centuries of evolution on the steppe to power a human engine of conquest. In a world where most agrarian societies relied on carbohydrate-heavy diets, the Mongols consumed vast quantities of meat and dairy. This fat-rich diet provided a slow-burning, long-lasting energy source, ideal for the sustained physical exertion required of a nomadic warrior. The constant intake of meat supported rapid muscle repair and growth. The collagen and minerals from bone broths aided in maintaining the health of their joints and connective tissues, mitigating the wear and tear of a life lived on horseback. Organ meats are packed with vitamin A, vitamin D, and B vitamins. Fermented dairy products like arag were a crucial source of vitamin C and probiotics, supporting a healthy immune system. The Mongol army was, in essence, healthier and more resilient. The single greatest advantage of the Mongol army was its speed. Their ability to cover vast distances at a pace that defied belief was their primary strategic weapon, and this mobility was directly enabled by their diet. The cornerstone of this advantage was the warrior's self-sufficiency. Because his food, dried borts in his saddlebag, the very horse he was riding, was portable, he was not tied to a slow, vulnerable supply train. This allowed for military maneuvers that were simply impossible for their opponents. They could execute vast flanking movements, appear hundreds of miles from where they were last seen, or conduct deep raids into enemy territory. Their ability to thrive in these conditions was one of their most terrifying advantages. Frozen rivers became highways, letting them bypass defenses and appear where least expected. The modern world has unwittingly rediscovered the principles of the Mongol diet. We see echoes of borts in lightweight high-energy protein bars. The focus on fat adaptation and ketogenic diets mirrors the metabolic state of the Mongol warrior. The Mongols teach us that strength is built from the inside out, and that a disciplined approach to our own sustenance can unlock reserves of energy and endurance we may not know we possess. The story of Genghis Khan's conquest is therefore incomplete without understanding the contents of his soldiers' stomachs. The power to conquer nations did not just come from the tip of the spear or the edge of the sword, it came from the nourishing broth, the dried meat, and the fermented milk that sustained the hand that held them. It is a powerful reminder that sometimes, the greatest changes in history begin not with a bang, but with a humble meal, shared around a fire, under the endless sky of the steppe.